there's a huge question of how we implement this kind of stuff in games for young children and how parents and kids can co-play together. Again, takes us back to the flow and stretching ability question, which is really interesting. We tried it a bit on a Flash adventure game we made last year for the Sherlock Holmes movie. This was a 2-player game. One of you plays Holmes, one of you plays Watson. And it was deliberately designed to require you to talk in real life. We deliberately designed the game not to have a bunch of communication capabilities within it. We didn't want to leave you locked in the game. We wanted to build something that recognised the fact that you're friends with your friends. You have their phone numbers. They're sitting in your IM window. You can send them emails. You may be sleeping next to them at night. They're there. We can use and design around those elements in kind of really powerful ways. And we got really positive feedback on this from people who did play. Actually, often with people who played with people they didn't expect to, but ended up kind of deepening those friendships with those people because they were talking and comparing notes and having to kind of move beyond purely the information that they were getting given in the game. Agency, again, something we talk about in games all the time, right? Kind of really, player choice, meaningful outcomes are, a huge focus for a lot of us. And I think, for a lot of people, probably right, honesty time, who did blow up Megaton? Who didn't blow up Megaton? Oh, okay. That's a really healthy split. That was about 50-50, but just on the side of good. Slightly less psychopaths in the room than I would have expected. I didn't, because I was too chicken, because I have really bad gaming OCD and I was just worried about what health packs I wouldn't be able to get if I did it. So Fallout 3, most of you will know, one of the big choices in it is whether or not you nuke this town. And I have a bunch of questions actually about how meaningful the impact of making that choice was, and games still often really struggle with meaningful impact. But now I understand a lot more about why those things are so important. And actually some really interesting things about the value of letting gamers break really big taboos. Because I still, it's still a screenshot that makes me faintly uncomfortable, and not just because of that weird statue. The nuclear, setting off a nuclear explosion, killing a whole bunch of people in that town is a really amoral moment if you choose to go down that road in the game. And as an industry, we're having it at the moment with Medal of Honor. We still often have a lot of questions to answer about how appropriate it is to let people pretend to do terrible things in games that we make. But actually, looking back at this now, I understand more that the intoxication of this wasn't so much that I have any particular bloodlust or any particular need to kill everybody in Megaton, although the sheriff did have it coming. But actually, because the tabooness of it emphasised the agency. This was a way of kind of amplifying and broadcasting the fact that I was about to get to do something really big, and you make it feel really big by making it really taboo. And now I've only started thinking about this, but now I'm really kind of digging into understanding what the psychological impact of these kind of gaming moments are, because I think they're very much not just about the surface content of the choices that we're making, but a bunch of much more complicated stuff. Persistence, really interesting. There's masses that games can do here, and again, they don't always do it. Ikaruga, brilliant example. Lots of shmups, actually, brilliant example. So Ikaruga, bastard hard, really, really hardcore. Still haven't finished level 3. But an unbelievably kind game. This is such a good-hearted game. It knows it's really hard. It doesn't actually want to make you suffer. And it does a bunch of really straightforward stuff, one of which is it just unlocks if you play it for long enough. It just logs how much time you spend, and if you put the hours in, it will unlock the levels for you so that you can practice everything. Unbelievably simple, unbelievably humane. And there's all kinds of other things that do that really well, that celebrate failure, that celebrate persisting in the face of failure, that celebrate longevity. There's a bunch of stuff about the rested experience system in WoW that's really clever, where if you come back to the game after you've been away for a while, you get a 200% experience rate for a chunk of time. Obviously, there's lots of practical reasons in terms of it helping you catch up with your friends, but also it's that feeling of having come away and come back that the game kind of really recognises and really rewards. Lots of we get this a lot in achievements now. It's really interesting to see how it often gets locked into achievements, where you'll get rewards for dying 200 times or scoring less than a particular number. And those are nice, but I'd really love to see those get more interesting. And I'd love to see them recognise your own small successes. So I hate, if I'm chasing Geometry Wars 2 scores, say, I'm here, boy am I here, and my friends are like on 139 million, and I'm not sure that's humanly possible. And I'm never going to get there. And now there's just this massive gulf in the high score table, even of my friends' high score table, where I've plateaued and I'm not going to catch them. And it frustrates me that we can't do anything to bridge that gap or reward that gap. And when I'm moving up, even if I'm not moving up very much, the game ought to know. And the game can tell, the game knows, the game has a huge amount of information on me and my friends and how long I've been playing and how long it took me and how many tries. And we talked about using game data better earlier. And I think if you really look at the idea that you can make your players happier by giving them a better relationship with failure and wondering how you can use all of that data to design better around failure, you start to hit on some really, really interesting things. So, there you go, proper expensive video games that, well, not Aruga, but some of the others that are doing this really well. But I appreciate you may not want to. Oh, hang on. This has been a nice thought experiment for me. Obviously, Channel 4 has a particular reason for doing it. So why care whether your players are happy or not, right? You've got plenty of other things to worry about. Why take on this terrible burden of being responsible for the happiness, 26% of the happiness levels of an army of strangers that you've never met? It doesn't sound like it's going to do much for your own happiness. Well, it is. It totally is. The first reason to do it, for heaven's sake, is because it's the right thing to do, right? Surely there's kind of a little bit of a moral imperative here that if you know that you're going to have such a big impact on people's lives, don't you want to have that, make sure that's a positive impact? Won't you sleep just a little bit better at night knowing that you've done something good? Won't it, be nice when you meet people who've played your game, when you know that they've had a good experience, partly because you really kind of thought about how that might work. It's also really sound business sense, surely, that if you're encoding, if you're lacing your games with effectively delivery mechanisms for happiness, the likelihood that you're going to get people to spend longer in your games, to spend more money in your games, to become Nicholas's whales, to recommend them more to your friends, to come back for the sequel, all of this is like completely straightforward. And finding those opportunities to embed that stuff in is only going to help you monetize in the long run. And then I also think it's really interesting from a kind of corporate social responsibility point of view. We as an industry want to keep making games. We want to be able to keep making them about all kinds of subjects. And I think in the same way that we're starting to talk a little bit about the ethics of some of our monetization policies and thinking about how we treat people through those systems, I think we also need to think about the ethics of a lot of our gameplay decisions. And at the moment we've talked about that mostly negatively. So I'm sure you all remember Jonathan Blow speaking out about Warcraft and about how he perceives that as being a kind of very unethical process. I think it's really fun to flip it and go, rather than worry about that stuff, let's look at opportunities where we can positively embed patterns of behaviour or thought patterns in games that we have good reason to believe will have a beneficial impact on the people who play them. So that's the big idea. Starting is really interesting. I'm still at the beginning of this, and it's producing all kinds of really interesting ideas and really different approaches to games. So one of the first projects we did, kind of with this in our heads, was a game design challenge, an afternoon to make a card game that we did at a thing called Wonder Lab earlier this year in London. Videos are all up on YouTube if you want to have a look. And we spent some 2 or 3 days talking about a lot of big game ideas and then set ourselves the challenge that rather than just coming out with a load of hot air at the end of it, we'd come out with a game that somehow expressed some of the issues that we'd been talking about over the last 2.5 days, and that game would be a card game. So in the end, we created a game called Couple Up. And Couple Up is about an awful lot of things, inevitably, but it was designed really around 2 principles. Was that we wanted to explore what would happen if we tried to make a game where everybody would win, and a game where everybody would get something good out of it. And so this is a game about finding a partner. Everybody who plays ultimately wins, and everybody who plays makes a new friend. And it worked. It totally worked. We took a room full of 40 people, and half an hour later, they all had a new friend and a drink. So you can't argue. I hope you can't argue with that. We'll soon find out. And we would never have come up with the mechanics that we did or the framing that we did without kind of putting this imperative at the heart of it. So I love this because this is how small you can start. Rather than, it's really fun to do it this way, that rather than start with a game design that you've already got and try and shoehorn some of these elements in, I strongly recommend starting with some of these principles. Start with that question. Start with figuring out what your picture of the naked man on the walrus is, of what you want to change, and then do a bunch of rapid prototyping, do some paper stuff, do some card stuff, to think about how you might express that in game design terms. And then that will then let you build into something that then becomes something completely different. And there's no reason that the principles behind this couldn't grow up to be, a World War II FPS, or a big Diablo clone, or who knows what else. So it's absolutely not about making stuff that necessarily is goody two-shoes on the surface, but it is about having real ambitions at the heart of it about what impact you want to have on the people who play. And that's how you make good games. Thank you very much.
I've got a question. I'll kick off, but I'm sure there's other questions in the room. Going through the list from reflection at the top, persistence at the bottom, is there one that you stumbled across and thought, nobody uses that? That's not being used as much as it could be compared to something?
I think one of the things, there's a bunch of things I didn't talk about there, one of which is humour. The classic happiness hack is that if you force yourself to smile, if you stick a pencil in your mouth and move the corners of your mouth up, it has an impact on your mood. You get happier, even if you're as miserable as you could possibly be. And so we know that works. So why more games don't have jokes in them, I don't understand. Find opportunities somewhere in your game for more jokes, and your players will be happier and feel better about themselves and like your game more. And there's also a bunch of really interesting stuff about deferred gratification, that actually mostly we enjoy anticipating something more than we enjoy getting it. So this is really interesting for a lot of Nicholas's kind of DLC stuff and ongoing purchase stuff, that actually putting the thing out there and letting me buy it straight away is maybe not in the long run going to give me as positive an impression of your game as if you tease it and let me know that it's coming but I can't buy it yet, and make me save for it or wait for it. And that's a really interesting strategy, I think.
Okay, any other questions for Margaret? Anything from around the room?
Did you ever have 41 people in your test group?
We prepped for that, so we had a bonus person that covered it, and it did work really well. And we're looking now at ways in which you scale that. We've got some very interesting ideas possibly coming next year on how you scale that. But yeah, designing to get people to meet people, designing for conversations is really interesting. I think often in the early days of a project, one of the tools we'll use is, you know how you always used to get told to design the back of the box to write that copy? I don't really like doing that. I like designing the conversations that people will have, saying I make this game, someone plays it, they go into work the next day, what do they say to their friend at work? What's the thing that they want to talk about? And when you know that, I think it's a really good design tool for figuring out what's actually going to be important.
And on the way up here, do you know how much money Flower made? I mean, I was hooked on that thing and just felt lovely after half an hour.
I find Flower terrifying and oppressive, and just made me want to go play Panzer Dragoon Auto, really. But that is maybe because I'm a bit dead inside.